Perfect, I said, my voice steady, though my heart hammered like a drum in my chest. You want me to cook Christmas dinner for 25 people? Then dinner will be on you. The room froze. My mother Diane stood there, the queen of commands, clutching her handwritten list of dishes, as if it were scripture. For the first time in my 31 years, she blinked at me like she could not understand English. I let the silence linger sharp and cutting before I reached for my phone. Each number I pressed sounded louder than the last, each beep echoing in the kitchen like the ticking of a bomb. Good afternoon, I told the voice on the other end. I need Christmas dinner for 25. Yes, full meals. Deliver on the 24th. Put it on the card of Diane Carter. She will cover it. When I ended the call, I did not shout or slam the phone. I simply placed it down with deliberate calm, as though I had just sealed a contract with myself. I turned and looked straight into my mother's eyes. Dinner is served. On your bill. Her face drained of color. The list slipped from her hand and fluttered to the floor. For years, she had spoken over me, silenced me, reduced me to labor and obedience. But now her mouth opened and nothing came out. The silence stretched until I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator, every sound magnified by the weight of what I had just done. Diane's hands trembled against the marble counter. You cannot be serious, she hissed. Finally, her voice a mix of fury and disbelief. I am entirely serious, I answered quietly. You ordered the show. I simply sent the bill back to its rightful owner. Her lips quivered as she stepped closer, trying to tower over me the way she always had, but something had shifted. I was no longer shrinking. My shoulders felt square, my spine solid. I saw in her eyes the flicker of panic, the realization that her reign of control might finally be cracking. Memories poured into me in an instant. Christmas Eve after Christmas Eve, me sweating over turkeys while she entertained guests with a wine glass in hand. Me wiping counters at 3 in the morning while she slept soundly. Me crying quietly in the pantry when my hands blistered from endless work. She had taken my labor and worn it like a crown. But tonight, with one phone call, I had knocked it off her head. Diane's chest heaved as she tried to gather her composure, but her eyes betrayed her. She was rattled, truly rattled for the first time in her life. My calm voice landed heavier than any scream. I am not your maid, I whispered, finally giving shape to the truth I had swallowed for years. This Christmas will not be my prison. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted completely. My name is Natalie Carter. I am 31 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by my mother's shadow. Diane Carter is 56, sharp-faced, sharp-tongued, and sharper still when it comes to reminding me of what I supposedly owe her. When my father passed away suddenly in a car accident when I was 10, she stepped into the role of absolute authority, and instead of guiding me, she controlled me. Every choice I made as a teenager was subject to her approval, from the clothes I wore, to the classes I took, even the friends I was allowed to bring home. By the time I was in college, she had perfected the art of reminding me daily that everything I had was because of her sacrifices, and therefore I owed her endless obedience. I lived with a constant undercurrent of guilt, manipulated into believing that saying no to her was the same as betraying the memory of my father. After graduation, I found a stable job in Boston as a project coordinator. Nothing glamorous, but enough to stand on my own 2 feet. I could have rented my own apartment, but Diane dangled the house like bait. Why pay rent, she insisted, when you can stay here and save money? On the surface, it seemed generous, but in reality, it was her leash. Living under her roof meant she could still summon me at any hour, order me to do chores, use my presence as proof that she was a selfless mother who gave her daughter everything. Holidays were the worst. For most people, Christmas means joy music and family gatherings. For me, it meant servitude. Every December, the house turned into a battlefield disguised as a banquet hall. Diane would invite relatives, colleagues, sometimes even neighbors, boasting that her daughter would prepare a feast worthy of royalty. I would spend days chopping, roasting, scrubbing, carrying trays, while she glided among guests in silk dresses, accepting compliments that belonged to me. If anyone asked for my help directly, she would cut in with a sharp laugh. "Oh, Natalie loves this. She was born for the kitchen, she insists on it." That sentence became a dagger I heard year after year until I almost believed it. But I was not born for the kitchen. I was not born to be a silent servant while my mother played the role of queen. The weight of years pressed heavier each time she snapped her fingers, and I obeyed each time she dismissed my exhaustion, with a roll of her eyes each time I woke up with swollen hands and a raw throat from stress. Yet I endured because I thought keeping the peace was safer than starting a war I could never win. This December, though, something inside me had shifted. It had been building since last spring, when I discovered a credit card statement addressed to me that I had never opened. Diane had used my social security number to apply for store credit lines, charging designer clothes and luxury items while pretending she had them gifted or bought on sale. I confronted her once timidly, and she brushed me off with a sneer. "Do not be dramatic, Natalie. It is all for the family. You will thank me later." The violation cut deep. That was the moment I began saving quietly, stashing away part of each paycheck into a separate account, photographing every questionable bill, archiving every manipulative text. I started to prepare not for a fight, but for freedom. Still, I waited because timing mattered. And then came the final insult, the long, curling list of dishes she threw on the counter with a smirk, announcing to me that 25 people were coming and that I would, of course, handle everything. That single act crystallized every humiliation of the past decade. It was not about the food. It was about her assumption that my existence was her property, that I had no identity beyond what I could do for her. And that was when the quiet fire inside me roared into certainty. I would not cook another meal to fuel her ego. I would not carry her crown of lies anymore. If she wanted a performance, she could pay for the ticket. That is why when I said perfect dinner will be on you, it was not just a sentence, it was the first strike of a freedom I had been waiting to claim. For years, my life had been stitched together by small humiliations that piled up until they became a suffocating quilt I could not crawl out from under. Diane never raised her hand to me, but her voice, her orders, her constant corrections were whips that left invisible scars. She treated my adulthood as an inconvenience, as if my only function was to orbit around her and ensure her image stayed untarnished. Take last Easter, for example. She had invited 15 cousins, promising them a lavish dinner. On the day of, she spent the morning at the salon getting her hair dyed while I stood in the kitchen peeling potatoes until my fingertips burned raw. When she returned, she breezed into the dining room in pastel pink, declaring, "I told you Natalie would make it perfect." I stood in the corner with flour on my shirt and sweat dripping down my temples, my hands shaking from exhaustion, and no one noticed me. Or perhaps they did, and chose silence because to acknowledge me would be to admit complicity in her charade. Thanksgiving was the same. I basted a 20-pound turkey every 30 minutes for 6 hours straight while she lounged on the couch watching parades on TV. When the family sat down, she lifted a glass of wine and smiled. "Does my daughter not spoil you all?" But she never let me sit at the table until everyone else had been served. I remember my uncle once asking if I had eaten, and Diane quickly cut in, "She snacks while cooking, she is fine." The truth was I was starving, but hunger had become such a normal companion that I hardly registered it. Birthdays were no different. For her 50th, she demanded a chocolate mousse cake from scratch triple layer decorated with spun sugar. I stayed up until 4 in the morning, wrestling with recipes I had never tried before, sweating as I burned my arm on a hot pan, trembling as I carried the delicate creation to the table. She took one slice pose for pictures with it, then told me to wrap the rest carefully for her guests to take home. I never got a single bite. It was not just the work, it was the erasure. My labor became her glory. My exhaustion became her performance of generosity. I became invisible in my own skin, a ghost moving silently from sink to stove to pantry, while her voice filled the air with lies about how devoted she was to family. Every time I tried to speak up, she weaponized guilt. After all I sacrificed for you, Natalie. How dare you complain about cooking a little food? Or worse, she dragged my father's memory into it, saying your father would be ashamed to see you so ungrateful. Those words crushed me more than any workload, because they made me feel like refusing her was equivalent to betraying him. I learned to bite my tongue to keep my head down to wear exhaustion as a badge of duty, but deep inside resentment grew like mold in a dark room. Sometimes in the quiet of night, I would cry into my pillow, tears soaking through fabric, while I tried to imagine a life where my worth was not measured by how many courses I could serve in a single evening. I envied the women I saw at work, who went home to quiet apartments, who spoke casually about dinner reservations, who planned vacations without asking permission. My life felt trapped inside the four walls of Diane's house, a prison with lace curtains and polished floors. The cruelest part was how she dressed it up as love. She told relatives, I am so proud of Natalie, she stays home to take care of me. She told neighbors, my daughter loves cooking, she insists on doing everything. Lies stacked on lies until my real identity was buried under a caricature of devotion. Each year blurred into the next, every holiday, another performance every weekend, another chore list. It became hard to tell where her needs ended and my existence began. And all the while she stood taller on the foundation of my silence. It was the second week of December when the final straw landed like a stone crushing my chest. I had just come home from work, my hands stiff from typing reports all day, my head buzzing with fatigue. I barely had time to take off my coat when Diane stormed into the kitchen with the heavy steps of a conqueror. She carried a long sheet of paper rolled into a scroll, and with a theatrical flourish, she slapped it onto the marble counter so hard it made the salt shaker rattle. Her smile was stretched thin, more of a sneer than a gesture of joy. "Read it," she commanded. I unrolled the paper and felt my stomach twist. It was a list written in her neat, forceful handwriting of dishes for Christmas dinner. Not one or two, but pages of them. 3 turkeys, 2 hams glazed in honey, mashed potatoes for an army, roasted vegetables in multiple varieties, salads, sauces, cakes, pies, puddings. And at the bottom, in big bold letters, Christmas dinner for 25 confirmed guests. My throat closed. 25. I whispered, hardly believing it. Yes, 25, she repeated, her voice soaked in false delight. All of my friends and our relatives are expecting the perfect evening, and you will make it happen. She poured herself a glass of wine as if the decree were nothing more than a casual suggestion. I stared at the list, the words blurring the weight of each demand, sinking like stones into my chest. For years, I had endured her orders, but this was no longer about feeding family. This was exploitation dressed in tinsel. She leaned on the counter, swirling her wine, watching my face for the usual sign of defeat. "Do not pout, Natalie," she said lightly, as if addressing a child. "You love this, remember. You always do such a wonderful job." The way she said it felt like chains tightening around my throat. Images of past holidays flashed like cruel memories. Me sweating over ovens, me sneaking bites of leftovers in secret, me being told to smile when I was too exhausted to stand. And now 25 mouths to feed, 25 sets of eyes to impress, 25 chances for her to bask in false glory. My hands shook not with fear this time, but with something sharper. Anger. My eyes locked on hers, and for the first time I did not look away. 25 people, I said slowly, letting each word drop heavy between us. Yes, she replied smugly, as if daring me to argue. I folded the paper, deliberately crushing the list of demands into a tight square, and placed it back on the counter. My voice came out calm, almost unnervingly calm. "Perfect," I said, echoing the word she had used. "It will be a perfect Christmas, because I will not be here." The glass of wine halted halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened. Her smile cracked. For a moment she looked genuinely confused, as though the possibility of me saying no did not exist in the laws of her universe. "You cannot be serious," she finally spat, her voice rising. "Oh, I am," I said, straighter than I had ever stood. "You want Christmas dinner for 25, you will have it. But not on my back." Her face flushed crimson, her nostrils flared. She slammed the glass onto the counter, red liquid sloshing onto the white marble. You are ungrateful, she hissed. After all I do for you, after all the sacrifices I made, you will ruin Christmas for this family over your selfishness. But her words bounced off me this time, because in that moment I realized Christmas had been ruined long ago every time she used my labor to polish her reputation. This was not selfishness. This was survival. And in her trembling hands and quivering voice, I saw it for the first time fear. Not mine, hers. The kitchen turned into a battlefield without a single plate broken. Diane's face darkened like a storm cloud rolling over the horizon. Her lips pinched into a thin white line as she stepped closer to me, each heel strike against the tile like a hammer. You will not embarrass me, Natalie. Not in front of my family, not in front of my friends, she hissed, her eyes flashing with fury. I stood my ground, my palms flat against the counter to steady myself. But inside, something fierce was rising, something that had been caged for decades and was now clawing its way free. I am not your maid, I said evenly, each syllable clear, deliberate. I am not here to feed your audience like some unpaid servant. Her mouth fell open, then snapped shut, then opened again, as if words failed her for the first time in her life. You will cook, she snarled finally, or you will regret it. She raised a trembling finger pointing at me as though she could burn me with sheer willpower. For years, that gesture had shrunk me, but not tonight. No, I said simply, and the word cut sharper than a knife. Diane's composure cracked, her voice rising an octave. Do you have any idea what people will say when they find out you abandoned your own mother on Christmas? They will see you for what you are, selfish, cruel, ungrateful. She was pacing now, circling me like a predator whose prey no longer cowered. She threw her arms wide. This house, this roof, the food you eat, all because of me. And how do you repay me? By spitting in my face, I lifted my chin. I repay you by finally telling the truth, I said, by refusing to let you use me as the backbone of your lies any longer. Her laugh was sharp, bitter, a sound that echoed through the kitchen like breaking glass. Lies. You think this family respects me because of lies. They respect me because I give them everything they could want at Christmas. I leaned forward, voice low, slicing through her theatrics. They respect me, Diane. They just don't know it. Every meal, every decoration, every detail, those were my hands, my sleepless nights, my broken back. You only wore the mask. Her cheeks burned red, her chest heaved. You think you can survive without me, she spat. You think you can stand against me. You live here because I allow it. You breathe easy because I shield you. Without me, you are nothing. The venom dripped from every word, but it did not pierce me this time. I met her gaze, and for once, she blinked first. I am more than you ever allowed me to be, I said softly but firmly. And from this moment forward, you will see it. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the tick of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then Diane's face twisted into something colder than rage, a smirk. Fine, she said with icy calm. Walk away. But do not come crawling back when the world realizes what a pathetic, spineless child you are. Her words no longer cut. Instead, they revealed her fear, the desperation behind her power. I stepped past her, my shoulder brushing hers, and for the first time she did not push me back. You should be careful, I murmured, because this Christmas you will not only face me, you will face the truth. I left her standing in that kitchen, clutching her glass of wine, like it was the last weapon she had left, and for the first time in my life the weight on my chest began to lift. In the days that followed our confrontation, I did not shout. I did not slam doors. I did not argue. Instead, I moved with quiet precision, each step deliberate, each action cloaked in stillness. Diane mistook my silence for surrender, but inside I was orchestrating something far greater than any argument could achieve. I began by collecting receipts, old bank statements, credit card bills, where her name appeared next to mine. I took photos, scanned them into a private folder only I could access. I saved copies of text messages she had sent me at ungodly hours, ordering me to prepare feasts or clean up after her party's words that revealed her entitlement in her own handwriting. Then I spoke discreetly to a lawyer recommended by a colleague at work, a woman named Allison, whose calm confidence steadied my nerves. Allison told me plainly, if your mother has been using your identity for credit lines or loans without consent, that is fraud, Natalie. We can prove it. Her words were like oxygen. For the first time in years, I felt a path opening. I also reached out to a detective, a retired officer named Harris, who now worked privately. He agreed to run checks on Diane's financial activities. And within a week, he confirmed what I suspected: she had multiple accounts, in both her name and mine accounts, that funneled money into shopping sprees and luxury items she claimed were gifts from friends. Harris handed me copies of her spending habits, the cold numbers that spoke louder than any accusation. Quietly, I packed away small things of mine: valuables, documents, jewelry my father had left me, slipping them into a suitcase I kept hidden under my bed. Each night after Diane fell asleep, I would move through the house like a shadow, gathering evidence, securing my freedom. And all the while, I played the role of obedient daughter on the surface. When she barked orders, I nodded when she prattled on the phone about the glorious Christmas ahead. I smiled faintly when she laughed at her own brilliance. I remained still. What she did not see was that her stage was crumbling under her. I also began reaching out to her invited guests, subtly, carefully. Diane had boasted to her sister Linda that I was thrilled to prepare dinner for 25, that I insisted on doing it. I sent Linda a quiet message late at night, simply asking if she would be willing to bring a dish to share, since I was overwhelmed at work. Linda's surprised reply confirmed my suspicion none of them knew the truth of who did the work they believed: Diane's performance. I let the knowledge settle. Soon they would see. My final move was subtle but devastating. I contacted the very restaurant I had ordered from during our kitchen showdown and confirmed the catering order under Diane's name, making sure the bill was directed straight to her account. I did not intend to cook a single dish. I intended to let her empire collapse under the weight of her own lies. On Christmas Eve morning, while Diane was still sleeping, I quietly loaded my packed suitcase into the trunk of a friend's car. I left a short note on the table. Dinner is ready, charged to you. I will not be here. Enjoy. It was only 12 words, but they carried years of silenced pain. Then I slipped away my phone on silent, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with something new: freedom blooming in my chest, like dawn breaking after a long night. Christmas Eve dawned with a brittle sky, sunlight glinting off frosted branches like shards of glass. I woke not to the sound of Diane shouting from the kitchen, but to the hush of a quiet hotel room where I had checked in the night before. The white sheets felt like a cocoon, the silence like a hymn. I sipped coffee slowly on the balcony, the ocean rolling steady in the distance, while my phone lit up with call after call from home. I ignored them, every buzz another reminder that I had finally severed the chain. By mid-morning, I allowed myself to glance at the messages: 10 missed calls from Diane, 12 from relatives, and a handful of frantic texts, all circling the same theme. Where are you? What do we do? People are arriving. The food is not here. I smiled faintly and placed the phone face down. At noon, the first photographs arrived, sent unintentionally by relatives posting to group chats. I saw Diane at the doorway, her face pale under the makeup, greeting her guests with forced cheer. Behind her, the house looked bare: no decorated table, no scent of roasting turkey, no twinkling lights. The pantry and refrigerator were empty, the good china locked away in my room. And then the knock at the door announced the restaurant delivery staff unloading trays of food into the foyer, each box labeled and billed directly to her. Guests looked confused, whispers buzzing like bees as they realized the grand matriarch had not prepared a single thing. Diane's voice grew shrill in the background of the photos, her hands flailing as she tried to pass it off as intentional, a modern twist on tradition. But her relatives were not fools. My Aunt Linda cornered her, demanding why she had boasted for weeks about the elaborate feast Natalie would prepare. My cousin Marcus questioned why she had told everyone I loved hosting, when clearly I was nowhere in sight. And then came the sharp voice of her brother-in-law, Richard, asking bluntly why the credit card charge showed Diane's name, not mine. Each question was a stone, and with each one, Diane's tower crumbled. I imagined her standing in that kitchen, red-faced, trying to summon the authority she had wielded over me for decades, only to find it slipping like sand through her fingers. Guests began comparing notes, stories Diane had told them about her generosity, about my supposed devotion. and slowly the web unraveled. They realized the truth that I had been the unseen labor behind every perfect holiday. The more they pressed her, the more desperate she became until finally she snapped, shouting that I was ungrateful, that I had abandoned her, that I had ruined Christmas. But instead of sympathy, she was met with silence, then the cold stares of relatives who had finally seen behind the curtain. From my hotel balcony, I could almost hear the sound of her kingdom collapsing, not with a bang, but with the weight of truth. Later that afternoon, Allison, my lawyer, called to tell me that two of Diane's relatives had already reached out to her directly, offering to provide testimony of how Diane had misrepresented finances and manipulated family under my name. The evidence I had gathered, combined with their statements, was enough to open a case. I thanked Allison and hung up my heart steady. I ordered room service lobster bisque and a glass of wine and savored it slowly, while imagining Diane's world unraveling dish by dish, lie by lie. By evening, the texts shifted from anger to pleading. Diane's messages begged me to return to explain, to fix the disaster. Relatives had left early, embarrassed, angry, unwilling to spend Christmas in a house built on deceit. Even Kevin, my younger cousin, texted me saying, "Natalie, she is falling apart. Everyone knows the truth now. Please call." I did not answer. Instead, I closed the curtains, drew a bath, and sank into warm water as outside carolers sang faintly in the streets. For the first time in my life, Christmas was mine, not hers. And while Diane tried to salvage her image amid the wreckage of her lies, I sat in quiet victory, knowing that sometimes the strongest rebellion is not fire or fury, but silence and absence. The morning after Christmas, I sat across from Allison in her quiet office, the city streets outside still glittering with leftover holiday lights. The warmth of her oak-paneled room contrasted sharply with the cold steel folders she slid across the table. Inside were neatly clipped documents, photocopies of Diane's forged applications, statements showing unauthorized charges under my name, and the Detective Harris's detailed report. Harris himself sat beside me, his presence calm, his voice steady as he explained the trail of deceit. "She opened at least 3 credit cards with your social security number, Natalie," he said, his finger tracing the printouts, "and she used your name to apply for a small loan against the house. These are not just questionable choices. These are federal offenses." I swallowed hard, the air heavy in my lungs, but a strange sense of relief spread through me. For years, I had carried the weight of feeling crazy, of questioning my own memory. When Diane insisted, I had agreed to things I had never even known about. Now here were the cold facts, undeniable. Allison leaned forward, her eyes sharp but kind. "Natalie, you have more power than you think. We can pursue legal action. At minimum, this will prevent her from using your identity again. At maximum, she could face serious charges." She paused, letting the words settle. "But it is your decision how far you want to take this." My phone buzzed on the table. Another flood of messages from Diane, her tone flipping between fury and begging. "Natalie, answer me, you cannot do this to me." Then another, "I am your mother, you owe me." And then, "Please fix this, they are all turning against me." The shift in her words told the story. Her empire of control was cracking, and she knew it. I turned the phone face down and looked at Allison. "I want to move forward," I said. "I want my name back." Allison nodded. "Then we will start with a restraining order on her use of your credit, and Harris will testify to her fraudulent activity. We will also notify the bank." Harris added, "I have already spoken with 2 of your relatives. Linda and Richard are willing to provide statements about how Diane presented your work as hers and misrepresented her finances to the family. That support will help build a picture of her long pattern of deception." I felt a lump rise in my throat. For so long, I had felt alone, isolated in her shadow. But now slowly, allies were appearing, people willing to stand by me. It was a kind of validation I had never expected. Over the next week, the plan moved quickly. Allison filed papers with the court to protect my credit and freeze Diane's ability to take loans in my name. Harris continued to dig, finding evidence of thousands spent on designer clothes, spa trips, and luxury items, many of which Diane had claimed were gifts from family. Meanwhile, the calls from relatives poured in. My Aunt Linda confessed she had always suspected something but had been afraid to speak. My cousin Marcus apologized for believing Diane's stories without questioning them. Even Richard, usually skeptical, admitted that seeing Diane unravel on Christmas convinced him she had manipulated us all. Each call felt like another brick, being pulled from the fortress Diane had built. She no longer stood untouchable. She was shrinking, exposed. One night as I sat in my small hotel room, Harris called with an update. Diane tried to apply for another credit card yesterday. It was denied because of the alert we placed. She is getting desperate. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Desperate Diane was dangerous, but she was also finally powerless. I was not the scared child in the kitchen anymore. I was a woman with proof, with allies, with a plan. When I hung up, I looked out the window at the quiet city lights glowing softly against the snow. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future without Diane's shadow, a future where I could walk into my own home and breathe freely. The evidence was there, the allies were gathering, and soon the world would see Diane not as the queen she pretended to be, but as what she truly was, a fraud, built on the bones of her daughter's silence. The hearing was scheduled for mid-January, weeks after the Christmas disaster, but the tension in the air made every day feel like a countdown. When the day arrived, I walked into the courthouse with Allison by my side, Harris carrying a thick binder of evidence, and my pulse steady despite the storm inside me. Diane was already there, seated at the defendant's table in a tailored navy dress that was supposed to project dignity, but the tightness around her mouth betrayed her panic. She avoided my gaze, but when the judge called the case to order, her eyes flicked to me, sharp and pleading all at once, like she still believed she could twist me into obedience. Allison opened with precision, laying out the facts: multiple unauthorized credit applications in my name, fraudulent use of my social security number, and the Christmas catering fiasco that revealed the years of manipulation. Harris testified calmly, presenting receipts, bank records, and signed applications. Diane had filled out the ink of her signature, damning her more than any words I could have spoken. Then came the witnesses. Linda described years of being told I loved to cook, when in reality I had confided to her once that I hated being forced into it. Richard testified that Diane had misrepresented her finances to him, claiming she had my support for investments she never discussed with me. Each testimony built a wall of truth around Diane until she sat rigid, her hands gripping the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Finally, the judge turned to me. "Miss Carter, do you wish to speak?" I stood slowly, my legs trembling but my voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor." I faced the room, my eyes sweeping across the scattered family who had come to watch. For years I was silent. I began silent because I believed that respecting my mother meant sacrificing myself. I cooked, I cleaned, I obeyed, and I thought it was love. But love does not erase a person. Love does not steal their name, their future, their dignity. I paused, letting the words sink in. Diane stared at me, her mouth trembling, eyes glistening with unshed tears, but I did not soften. "Love does not mean fraud," I said clearly. "And for years, that is what she did to me." The room fell silent. Even the judge's expression softened for a moment before he cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Carter. You may sit." Diane finally spoke when it was her turn, her voice high and brittle. "I did it for her," she cried. "I gave her everything. She lived under my roof, ate my food, enjoyed my life, and this is how she repays me." But the words rang hollow. Every time she shouted for sacrifice, Allison countered with evidence. Every time she painted herself as a victim, Harris presented receipts. Diane's arguments collapsed like a house of cards in the wind. At the end of the hearing, the judge ruled swiftly. The evidence was clear. Diane had committed fraud. She would face restitution and mandatory financial counseling, and any further attempt to use my name would carry criminal charges. More importantly, the court granted my request for a protective order forbidding her from opening accounts, taking loans, or conducting business tied to my identity. The gavel struck, and for the first time in my life, I felt the sound was not punishment, but liberation. Outside the courthouse, Diane tried to approach me, her heels clicking desperately across the stone steps. "Natalie, wait," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "You cannot cut me off. I am your mother." I stopped, turned slowly, and let her see the steel in my eyes. "You were my mother," I said quietly, "until you chose to be my jailer. I am done being your prisoner." The silence between us was heavier than any scream. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. She was shrinking small, powerless, in a way I had never seen before. I turned and walked away, each step carrying me further from the chains she had bound me with. My family watched, some in shock, some nodding in quiet approval, but none moved to stop me. For once, they saw me not as Diane's daughter, but as a woman who had reclaimed her own name. The weeks after the hearing felt like breathing new air, crisp and untainted. For the first time since I was a child, I woke up without the weight of Diane's demands pressing against my chest. I moved into a modest apartment overlooking the harbor, the kind of place that would have once seemed insignificant compared to her grand house, but now felt like a palace because it was mine. I painted the walls soft blue, filled the shelves with books I had never had time to read, and let silence fill the rooms without apology. My first morning there, I brewed coffee and sat by the window watching seagulls glide over the water, and I realized I did not have to look over my shoulder anymore. Diane's texts had dwindled to nothing after the protective order, her silence louder than her voice ever was. Occasionally, I heard from relatives who wanted to check on me. Linda came by once with a pie and whispered that she admired my courage. Marcus emailed to say he wished he had seen through Diane sooner. Even Richard, who had once dismissed my exhaustion as exaggeration, admitted that the truth had changed the way he looked at family. Slowly, the narrative shifted. For years, Diane had painted me as the ungrateful daughter, but now the story had reversed. People saw her manipulation, her greed, her lies, and they saw me not as weak, but as someone who had endured and then chosen dignity. I built new routines. I signed up for a cooking class, not because I had to, but because I wanted to learn for myself. The irony was not lost on me. For years, I had cooked mountains of food under duress, but making a single dish in my own kitchen on my own terms felt like reclaiming a stolen piece of my identity. I also started therapy, where I unpacked years of guilt and learned to draw boundaries that Diane had always erased. My therapist reminded me that love without respect is not love at all. It is control. That sentence became my anchor. At work, I began to thrive, no longer exhausted from nights of servitude. My colleagues noticed, commenting that I seemed brighter, stronger, more present. I was finally living as myself, not as Diane's shadow. On New Year's Eve, I lit a candle on my windowsill and whispered a promise to never again let silence become chains, to never again mistake obedience for love. As fireworks burst over the harbor, I felt tears on my cheeks, not of sorrow, but of release. Diane, I knew, was still out there somewhere, plotting, stewing, perhaps telling new stories to anyone who would listen. But her power over me was gone, dismantled piece by truth and courage. She could no longer touch my name, my credit, my future. And even if she tried, I now had allies. A lawyer, a detective, a network of family who had finally seen the truth. The cycle was broken. Looking back, the most powerful thing I had done was not shouting or fighting, but choosing silence. At the right moment, choosing absence instead of performance, letting her lies collapse under their own weight. Sometimes the strongest rebellion is the quiet refusal to play the role written for you. That is what saved me. That is what set me free. And as I sat in my apartment, the city alive with celebration, I knew this was the beginning of a life defined not by fear, but by dignity.